It's more crucial than ever to keep an eye out for potential cyber risks. The CyberStrong platform provides the most automated way to manage cyber risks while allowing you to achieve continuous compliance. Get visibility into your cyber risk posture, backed by data pulled from your systems, and roll it all up to risk dashboards, reports, and metrics. Stay one step ahead of even the most unprecedented cyber risks from assessment to boardroom. And that's thanks to a holistic, intuitive solution that keeps everyone in the know. To learn more about CyberSaint's CyberStrong platform, please visit securityweekly.com/CyberSaint.
Endpoint security is designed to protect every device in your fleet, wherever it may be. These days, that can be a lot of different places. Find out how HP Wolf Security uses emerging strategies like application isolation, along with a zero-trust approach and framework to give you a powerful, manageable, usable solution to your growing and increasingly spread-out security challenges. Learn how HP Wolf Security can make a difference across your endpoints at securityweekly.com/HP Wolf.
How have business drivers impacted your organizational risk? Simulate Extended Security Posture Management enables CISOs to know what parts of your cybersecurity portfolio to keep, what to get rid of, and what to buy. Know that your cybersecurity investments are optimized and can reduce cybersecurity risk. With Simulate, you don't assume you are secure, you know. Visit securityweekly.com/simulate to learn more. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Ben Carr and Joe South. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions often and will reach out to you once reviewed. With more than 25 years in information security, Brandon has played nearly every position on the field, from security engineer to CISO, from security entrepreneur to product manager. He has either done it or seen it firsthand. While he hasn't always done it right the first time, he has learned from his mistakes and actively engages the community so that they too may learn from his mistakes and his successes. Brandon, welcome to
Thanks for having me.
Weekly.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It's great to be here as well. I've made lots of mistakes as well, so this is a great platform to share those mistakes, and so we'll get to do that together today. How's that?
Sounds great. Sometimes I just want to be a warning to others.
Right, exactly right. I told Paul when I first did my first podcast with him, he asked if I wrote a book, what would it be called? And I said something like, I figured it out. Like eventually I was going to figure it out. I figured it out by now, Brandon, but this was like 6 years ago. So I hadn't fully figured it out. I figured it out since.
Well, we're going to begin.
Yeah, so we're going to talk the boardroom and the role of security in the boardroom. As we've covered on this show, there's been some articles around some SEC guidance around needing cybersecurity expertise at the board. And the way I think about this is Sarbanes-Oxley. Back in the day, MCI, Enron, we went through this regulatory period where we were trying to figure out how to create some financial reporting controls and some independence from a financial perspective at the board. And Sarbanes-Oxley was born. We have CFOs and CEOs signing off around financial impact statements that they don't create a material risk to the business. Here we are, good 20 plus years later, we're starting to have these conversations now about doing this from a security perspective. And a lot of people are like, well, will they actually do it or won't they do it? And if they do it, what does that mean to the makeup of the board and the board role in cybersecurity moving forward? So let's start with the SEC kind of guidance first, and then what does that mean for boards and cybersecurity?
Yeah, and I know a lot of folks listening were probably at RSA last week. We also had the Gartner SRM Security and Risk Management Summit in DC, and I presented on this topic. So there's a lot of, I guess you could say, curiosity and a lot of other people waiting kind of for the other shoe to drop, so to speak, with regards to the rulemaking. I actually read through all 128 pages of it. I didn't make it through all of the comments, but there were a lot. And I agree with your sentiment. Just like we saw after Sarbanes-Oxley, we saw the rise of kind of the independent audit committee reporting to the board on a regular basis. And it seems to be prevailing opinion from my friends and colleagues that that's very much exactly the way we're going to go here. And a very interesting topic came up in chatting with some fellow CISOs and ex-CISOs at the conference last week. And that was around, well, if that's the case, where are we going to source those people? And one of the thoughts was, okay, if we have already within our organization an information security, steering committee, council, whatever you want to call it, we might want to begin the process of up-leveling those individuals, both in the education of cybersecurity, but more importantly, getting them at the right tier in the organizational hierarchy to be able to use that as a vehicle for being essentially that audit committee for security into the board conversations.
Yeah, when I think about the audit committee today, right, around the financial side, independent folks that sit on that board looking at the financials and kind of providing guidance, does that mean an independent set of cybersecurity experts now in these boards? Like, where does the role of the CISO, who's already, well, in some organizations have a seat at the board, and other organizations they don't, like, does the CISO head up this committee of the independent? Like, how does this play out? Because I'm curious what the CISO's role in this independent committee, let's call it the security committee for lack of a better term at this point. Where's the CISO fit in that security committee? Does he head it up? Is it completely separate from the CISO role? Like, how do you see this playing out? I'm just curious, like, the structure of what this might look like.
Yeah, well, the very interesting and telling part about this SEC proposal was they actually get into details about the type of experience that directors on the board have to have. And right now, the person in the organization that's most suited for that role is the chief information security officer, because in most organizations, they've come up through the ranks. Though I have met some CISOs who are just essentially functional executives as they do rotations through the business. And some of them have been in charge of HR or portions of finance, and then they come into IT or security. So I think what we're going to see is a greater scrutiny on the expertise of the board. And they actually talk about some specific roles and types of roles that individuals should have had. And auditor is actually one of them. Incident response manager, business continuity planner. So we have the talent within the organization. I think it's natural for the CISO to essentially own this or chair, shall we say, this committee. The question is this what gets us that seat at the table? I mean, I know a lot of CISOs still report up through the CIO, and the CIO takes their 5 or 10 slides every quarter, collapses it down to 1 or 2, and then goes and tries to give a positive message to the board. So I think this is actually going to elevate the role, much like we see the role of the CFO and the audit committee working together.
Yeah, I want Ben to chime in here because I know Ben plays, as a CISO. I'm curious, Ben, how you see this kind of playing out on your side.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. I think I'm looking for something to happen as a critical junction when we have to elevate the what the leadership role of the CISO is. I'm hoping that this guidance does some of that. I really think it needs to be looked at a larger impact to the organization as kind of a critical role. I'm really wondering when boards actually start seeing that this is the largest risk that they're facing, and as a result, have to take proactive action to get people with experience as part of the board. And then, by proxy, making sure kind of an oversight with the CISO that actually the company is doing the right thing. So I wonder whether this is that moment where it starts to happen, or whether we're still a ways away from that. I've seen different feedback from people, right? And I'm sure you have too, when you were at the Gartner conference and talking about this.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that kind of came out of these conversations, after I presented, there was much more conversation in the hallways on the way to the next session and such as I was pulled along. And a few of these folks that I spoke to are already getting pulled in, and they're having their senior leadership say, "Hey, look, we need to talk about the ramifications of this. Can you brief the board on what your interpretation is?" And I remember when Sarbanes-Oxley rolled out, and I was meeting with my CIO about what it meant. And I said, look, it's going to take into scrutiny a lot of other controls, specifically around the financials, but we're going to need to beef up security. And her initial reaction to me was, I think you're just making a play for a bigger budget. Well, fast forward a few years, and we see that is actually the case. So my hope, and it's genuine hope, is that boards take this seriously. And even if this doesn't go through, it elevates the conversation enough to where they begin to take it more seriously. Maybe they dive down and actually bring the CISO into those board meetings instead of having the CIO proxy those messages.
Well, that conversation you had, that's exactly the motivation and the reason why that needs to change, right? I mean, the CIO was essentially creating a layer there, not elevating the true issue for at least have discussion. I mean, you may have an opinion and it may be decided in a different point from a risk posture set, but at the end of the day, not having the discussion in and of itself is a huge problem for the organization.
You're absolutely right. And I'm hearing more and more of CISOs reporting to chief operating officers, chief financial officers, and the like. So I think this may be kind of disruptive at that next layer of leadership. And, I was talking to some folks that are a little bit more of the no hair / gray hair crowd, shall we say, right? The older folks in our profession. And they're looking at this as like, if this goes through, this is the best retirement plan ever because I've got the expertise, I've done the job, and now I'll just go sit on a couple of board seats and that'll be my retirement plan. So I think these conversations are happening at all levels. It's just a matter of whether or not the rulemaking goes through and accelerates it, or if it doesn't, and we keep kind of treading water, making incremental process or progress.
If this rule passes, I mean, it as I read it, it asks boards to articulate what their experience is, but it doesn't mandate that they actually have experience, right? It's just you have to describe what the experience is on the board. Do you see this as actually going far enough to make that change where boards will actually have to have membership that actually articulates that? I mean, is that going to be forced by shareholder concern?
I think it's so. When we start to see, the fact that you have to report your incidents, you have to put updates into your quarterly filings. So there's going to be scrutiny on this one way or the other. And I think that going forward, while it doesn't mandate that you have the experience, it does outline the expectations of what they should have and whether or not they have experience. And if you do suffer an incident that is material and has to be reported, and you don't have someone with the expertise that is reporting on this stuff on a regular basis into your board and across your senior leadership team, I could make the argument that they've had a breach of fiduciary duty and not taking that into serious consideration.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of this, right? Is when you think about what happens in Sarbanes-Oxley, right? The CEO and the CFO have to sign off on the financials as part of the 10K or the 10Q, right? If we go down a similar path, and the CEO and the CISO have to sign off on attestations of security controls and not having any material incidents. Like, think about the game-changing situation that's in, because we've seen some very interesting lawsuits lately, Brandon, where CISOs are getting pulled into lawsuits around breaches, right? We saw the one with Uber, and there's been a couple others. This has a huge potential impact to the role of the CISO, because now you're actually putting your name on the line. This is a D&O conversation now, right? Where that hasn't been the case up until today. And that's a very different position for this role.
My background's been in critical infrastructure. I still have a lot of friends that are CISOs in that space. And I was having a conversation with one who just left a publicly traded critical infrastructure organization. And part of his gnashing of teeth and kind of clawing and fighting before he left was around exactly that. It says, look, I can't be responsible for this if the organization is not going to include me in those umbrella policies, because there can be, in some cases, civil or criminal penalties. And like you said, we're seeing CISOs get named in the lawsuits. So I think there's going to have to be a kind of an opening up of the tent to let some of these folks in and to give fellow CISOs some of those protections. And we're seeing very interesting things play out in the insurance market as it relates to cybersecurity as well, beyond the cybersecurity liability policies, but overlap and kind of a Venn diagram between that, the errors and omissions, and directors and officers insurance. And I think that's going to be a very, very interesting set of conversations that folks are going to have at the most senior levels of their organization.
Yeah, Brandon, I think that's really true. I've actually seen those conversations. I've heard from colleagues that are looking at roles, and that if you're thinking about a CISO role and you're not having conversations regarding D&O insurance and what it looks like if you get named in a breach incident, or you get replaced because they have to have a scapegoat, then you're not doing yourself any favors moving forward. I mean, I think anyone who's smart in this industry is having those conversations as part of any new role.
Well, I think it's also, when you're going through the interview process and they say, do you have any questions for us? Yeah. Am I included in your D&O policy? Yeah. That's first and foremost, right? That's probably going to be on the tip of a lot of CISOs' tongues as they start to switch jobs.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So what should organizations start thinking about in preparing for this? Again, it's guideline. There's guidance out there. There's proposed rules to be implemented. They haven't been implemented. But as an organization, Brandon, what should public companies, boards, what should they start doing to prepare for this? Because I don't think anybody wants to be blindsided when this comes down. So are there a set of steps that organizations should be taking right now to be in a better position if this truly does come through?
Well, I'll tell you, if I was sitting in that seat again, and I debate about going back to it because it seems like it's gotten even more hectic and stressful since I left being a CISO. But very early on, when I take a new position as a CISO, I go and I collect corporate communications, both internal, external, HR, legal, CIO, and I sit down and essentially pre-draft breach notification letters, right? Do we have a breach of employee data? Do we have a breach of customer data? Do we have a loss of intellectual property or anything else that we have to report? And then treat it like Mad Libs, right? Insert a date here, insert a number of records here, et cetera. And then we vet that. So we always have kind of a version 1.0 ready to go. So in the heat of the moment, we're not having to rewrite the thing from scratch. I think that people need to start doing this with regards to the language with their filings out of the gate. Imagine that you did have an incident, and we're going to have to put this in our annual report and into our quarterly filings. What are we going to say? And pre-draft some of that stuff. Also, like I said, if you already have that committee or council inside that helps govern the information security function and practice, if you're just including members of the business leadership, that's great, but rope in HR and legal, maybe compliance and privacy at a minimum also, and think about elevating that. And these are all ways to kind of, shall we say, kind of presage the conversations that you're going to have, start getting people comfortable with some of the lexicon, start getting people comfortable with understanding the risks. And I think if you go through those two exercises and maybe even use that council that you've established and elevated to be some of the initial people to draft some of the language in those what-if scenarios, that goes a long ways towards prepping them also if they get a camera and microphone stuck in their face.
Yeah, absolutely. Always better to be prepared and know what you're going to say when the camera is on than dealing with it ad hoc on the fly, which is why I build my run of show notes. So I always know what's coming next, Brandon, just
good
preparation.
Planning.
Yeah. Good planning. What about board seats? Should organizations start thinking about understanding security expertise of their existing board? Should they start thinking about recruiting security skill sets? Like, if I'm getting ready to make some board changes, is this something I should be evaluating, knowing that this might be coming? And where do you go? Like, there's a bunch of us out there that have been in this industry for a long time. You go tap into that community, or where are you going to go find the resources?
Well, there's actually recruiting firms that specialize in this, just finding board members. But I mean, the shareholders get to vote. And if you're in a highly targeted industry, maybe you've had trouble getting cybersecurity liability insurance, you might want to double down on finding an independent director from outside. I know some organizations also bring, they'll have a board member seat that's from, say, one of the big four from an auditing perspective. Maybe it makes sense to tap into the cybersecurity programs at those partners that you've already got, maybe get another seat. But I think if you're in a highly targeted or critical infrastructure or other type of industry and shareholder votes come up and this thing's passed, people are going to look at that and say, well, yeah, you got a CIO, ex-CIO on your board, but they haven't been in technology in 5 or 8 years. A lot of things have changed. What about cybersecurity, right? And I think that that's going to start a dialogue that's way bigger than what's happening within individuals' own enterprises.
Yeah, interesting. And by the way, that is my retirement plan. I do want to sit on a few boards and, advise when it's too hot in Texas to golf. What else am I going to do? I can do my podcast and I can do board work, right? I mean, that's the perfect retirement plan for a bunch of us.
It's only a dozen days out of the year, give or take.
Exactly
you
right.
You can stack up a few of them.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be awesome. You get 2 or 3 of those gigs, you're golden.
Well, it makes me wonder with organizations like the National Association of Corporate Directors, are they going to come out with a board member certification for cybersecurity? Like, what would a board level cert look like? It's going to be a little bit different than the CISSP, I take it.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be interesting, right? It's one of those areas where, if you want to be a board member, you need to go get certified in NACD. But if they actually had a security certification at NACD, that would be a really interesting opportunity for a number of people that would want to get into this, into these seats, right? Because it definitely would give you the credentials you need to sit there. So,
absolutely,
yeah. Ben, when you think about your role today at Cradlepoint, right? Like, where do you see that elevation? Are you seeing some of the same things Brandon's seeing? Is, how do you elevate some of that independence up into the board? What are you doing on your side? Because I think, you have the most relevant experience in this group right now, being active in the seat.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time, right? This is a couple times for me. So it's an interesting perspective to think about. I'm certainly seeing that we're talking about the role in a different light than we have in the past. I report up through the COO, and so that provides me a different channel. And I actually own IT at our organization, right? And we did that because of the importance of security and the alignment that we wanted to have. And so having those discussions foundationally at the E-staff, having those discussions, up into the board, it's super important and super critical. Do I have everything I want from a availability and access perspective right now? No, I think that there's still a greater elevation that needs to happen. But I think a lot of organizations are figuring out how to do that. And I think, those organizations that succeed will do much better from a shareholder perspective, especially if they have a breach or an incident, because people are going to start to ask a lot of questions. I mean, we've seen that with lawsuits against people who sit in the role. And I think that's one of the big concerns is how do you make sure you're handling the due diligence and the responsibility you have and the responsibility to shareholders and investment.
Yeah. Brandon, along the same lines, right, is, that visibility and being prepared is going to be key as, the SEC decides how to move some of this stuff forward. And I think it's just something organizations need to think through. And, having somebody like Ben, who's actually going through it right now, is some great insight, I think, for the audience to really get their arms around some of these issues.
And I also think the next...
Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, I think the other point to point out here, and I've talked to a couple of attorney friends of mine, is around the concept of materiality. If you read the materiality portions of this proposed rulemaking, it reads almost like a simplified version of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's not just, do we have a breach, do we have a loss of records or whatever. It is unauthorized access or exceeding existing access, and then gets into the alteration or theft of information, destruction of information. So we're seeing things, it's putting a very shiny, bright light on ransomware and insider threats, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's an important note, right? It's not just about having somebody who has experience, but it's also is the company handling the information security oversight and budget appropriately, right? Are they actually doing the right things, and can they articulate the awareness of when an incident has actually happened? And I think that's super important. So it's this mixture of making sure that we see, former CISOs, people with security experience, becoming part of the board, and being independent directors, but also making sure that we're seeing that alignment with budgets and responsibility of companies investing appropriately to make sure they can respond.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Been a pleasure, you two. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.